Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Well, today we're tackling strategy, but not the kind that gets lost in a dusty binder on a shelf somewhere.
We're talking about the kind that actually helps you win.
Exactly. And to guide us, we've got Playing to Win, How Strategy Really Works.
Written by the former CEO of P&G, A.G. Lafley, and business school dean Roger Martin.
It's a fantastic read, packed with real-world examples and actionable insights. So are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so one of the first things that struck me about the book is how Lafley and Martin just cut through all the BS surrounding strategy.
They really do.
They argue that simply having a vision or a plan, well, it just isn't enough.
You know, a vision without clear choices, it's kind of like setting off on a trip with no destination.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
You might enjoy the scenery along the way, but you'll never actually get where you want to go.
And a plan, a plan without any real understanding of your strengths, well, it's like trying to run a marathon in flip-flops.
You're just setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap, of thinking that just having a plan is enough.
Oh, absolutely. And they also debunk this whole idea that long-term strategy is impossible in today's fast-paced world, which I think a lot of people believe.
Right. Like everything is just so chaotic and unpredictable that you can't possibly plan for the long term.
Yeah. But if you look at companies like, say, Apple, Google, or Microsoft, they're all playing the long game. They're not just reacting to the latest trends. They're making strategic bets that pay off years, even decades down the road.
And that's how they've become the giants they are today, right?
Exactly. They're shaping the future.
It's so true. And Lafley and Martin, they make it very clear that simply copying what everyone else is doing, well, it won't get you ahead.
We'll just be another face in the crowd.
Exactly. Real strategy is about differentiation. It's about those choices that make you stand out. It's about, being unique.
It's about carving out your own space and becoming the best at what you do.
Yes. So let's dig into the meat of their framework. Lafley and Martin break down strategy into 5 key choices.
The building blocks of a winning approach.
The first one is defining your winning aspiration.
And this is where it gets really interesting. It's not about simply wanting to participate in a market. It's about aiming for the top spot. Really going for it.
So not just playing the game, but winning it.
Exactly. And they use the example of Saturn, a car brand launched by GM back in the day.
Oh, yeah. I remember Saturn. Their whole thing was being different and customer-focused.
Right. But their goal, it was simply to be a player in the small car market.
Not to necessarily dominate it.
Meanwhile, you had competitors like Toyota and Honda, and they aimed to dominate.
And what happened?
Well, the results speak for themselves.
Saturn fizzled out, while Toyota and Honda became powerhouses.
It's a pretty stark contrast.
It really is. So what's the big takeaway here for our listeners? Why is defining that winning aspiration so crucial?
Well, I think the Saturn story really highlights how important it is to set ambitious goals. Because a weak aspiration, it's going to lead to weak choices and ultimately, failure.
So don't be afraid to aim high.
Exactly. But on the flip side, a bold ambition, it fuels those strategic decisions that actually drive success. It's like setting your sights on the summit of a mountain versus just aiming for base camp.
I love that analogy. The higher you aim, the more effort you put into it.
You've got to bring your A game.
So once you've defined that winning aspiration, the next choice is where to play. And this is about deciding which markets, customer segments, channels, even stages of production you're going to focus on.
It's all about focusing your energy where you have the best chance of winning. And sometimes that means making tough choices about where not to play.
Right, like you can't be everything to everyone.
Exactly. You've got to be strategic. And they use P&G as a case study for this.
They do. They talk about how P&G revitalized the Oil of Olay brand, which, had kind of become a bit stale.
They saw this opportunity to reposition Olay in what they call the prestige segment.
Prestige. Can you explain that for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term?
Sure. So prestige, it refers to products that offer that premium feel, those high-end features, but at a more accessible price point.
So kind of like a bridge between those mass market brands and the really expensive luxury brands.
Yeah, exactly. They bridge the gap. And P&G, they saw an opening to make Olay more appealing to consumers who, wanted that high-quality skincare, but without breaking the bank.
So they weren't trying to compete with the drugstore brands. They were going after those prestige brands, but with a more affordable price point.
Exactly. And they did it by focusing on mass retail channels, like going head to head with those prestige brands right on the same shelves.
And they also targeted a whole new customer base, women interested in anti-aging skincare.
Which was a smart move. Anti-aging skincare was, and still is, a huge market.
And it totally worked. I remember seeing those Olay ads and thinking, wow, they've really stepped up their game.
It was a brilliant strategic move.
It really was. And then there's the example of P&G's family care division.
Another great example of choosing where to play.
So they decided to narrow their focus to North America, targeting specific consumer segments and doubling down on their core brands.
Bounty, Charmin, and Puffs.
The essentials.
Exactly. So instead of trying to be everything to everyone, they focused on being the absolute best in a few key areas.
And I'm guessing that really paid off.
It did. They were able to streamline their operations, reduce costs, and then reinvest those savings into things like marketing and innovation. And that laser focus allowed them to achieve some pretty significant growth.
So sometimes less is more.
Sometimes, absolutely.
It's about choosing your battles and then committing to winning them.
You can't win them all, or at least not all at once.
And that brings us to the third key choice: how to win.
Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
And this is where you decide your core strategy, right?
Right. You got two main options. You can either be the low-cost leader, or you can differentiate yourself with unique, high-value products or services.
So are you going to be the Walmart of your industry or the Apple?
That's a good way to put it. And both approaches can be incredibly successful. It all depends on your strengths, your target market, and your overall business goals.
I'm curious to hear some examples of companies that have really nailed these different approaches.
Sure. So let's start with low-cost leadership. Think about Mars, the candy bar company.
Okay, Mars. I can see that.
They've built their whole strategy around efficiency and affordability. They streamline their production processes, use less expensive ingredients, and then pass those savings on to consumers with lower prices.
So they're not trying to be the fanciest candy bar on the shelf. They're all about delivering that value for money.
Exactly.
But how do they actually use that cost advantage to win? I mean, there are a lot of cheap candy bars out there.
Well, here's the key. They reinvest those savings into securing prime shelf space in stores.
That's brilliant. Because when you're standing in the checkout line, staring at that wall of candy, you're more likely to grab the Mars bar if it's right at eye level and a few cents cheaper than the competition.
Exactly. They're not just competing on price, they're using their cost advantage to gain a strategic advantage in distribution.
That's a really important point for our listeners to consider. It's not enough to just be cheap. You have to use that cost advantage to actually create real value for your customers.
Absolutely. Now, on the flip side, let's look at differentiation. P&G's fine fragrances business is a great example of this.
Okay, so we're talking about perfumes and colognes.
Yeah.
How do they differentiate themselves in such a crowded market?
Well, instead of chasing fleeting trends and pumping out new scents every season, they decided to create brands based on lasting consumer needs and preferences.
So they're not just selling perfume, they're selling an experience, an identity.
Precisely. They're tapping into those deeper emotional connections that people have with fragrances. And they partner with top fragrance houses and designers to create these high-quality, distinctive scents.
So they're going for quality over quantity.
Exactly. And that's a key element of differentiation. Understanding what your consumers truly value and crafting an offering that really speaks to those desires. It's about being different in a way that matters to your target audience.
And that brings us to the fourth key choice: capabilities.
Now we're talking about putting those choices into action.
So you've got your grand strategy, but can you actually execute it?
Right, because you can have the most brilliant strategy in the world, but if you don't have the capabilities to pull it off, you're going to fall flat.
It's like having a great recipe, but not having the right ingredients or the skills to actually cook the dish.
And once again, P&G offers some great insights here. They identified 5 core capabilities: consumer understanding, brand building, innovation, go-to-market mastery, and global scale.
And these are like the pillars that support their entire business,
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And what's interesting is that these capabilities, they all reinforce each other. So their deep understanding of consumers, well, that fuels their innovation. Their innovation strengthens their brands, which allows them to dominate in the market.
It's a virtuous cycle.
It is.
So they're not just good at a few things, they're good at a few key things that work together to make them an unstoppable force.
And that's something to aim for.
It is. And this leads us to the fifth and final choice: management systems.
This is about making sure that everything runs smoothly and that everyone is on the same page.
So we've made our big strategic choices. We've built those capabilities to execute them. Now what?
Well, now you need to put in place the structures, the processes, the measures that'll actually support your strategy and keep everyone aligned.
Okay, so it's about translating those big ideas into concrete actions and systems that people can follow, day in and day out.
Exactly. And P&G, they provide a great example of this. They realized that their old strategy review meetings, well, they were too focused on just presentations and not enough on real discussion and debate.
So it was all about show and tell rather than actual strategic thinking.
Right. So they overhauled the whole process,
Yeah.
shifting to more in-depth conversations that encouraged, strategic thinking and productive tension. They wanted people to really challenge each other's ideas.
That's interesting. So they were willing to challenge their own internal processes to make sure they were serving their strategic goals.
They were. And they also implemented this OGSM document, which is essentially a single-page summary of a business unit's strategic choices, objectives, goals, strategies, and measures.
A nice, concise way to keep everyone focused.
Exactly. And this simple document, it ensured that everyone was on the same page, working towards the same goals.
So the strategy wasn't just living in some dusty binder on a shelf. It was actively guiding the day-to-day decisions and actions of the entire organization.
Yes, exactly. That's the power of effective management systems. They translate strategy into action and they make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction. It's about creating an environment where strategy isn't just some abstract concept, it's a lived reality.
It's about embedding that strategic thinking into the very DNA of the organization.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here in part one. We've explored the 5 key choices of strategy. We've seen how they play out in the real world. And I think it's clear that making those smart strategic choices, it can make all the difference.
It can be the difference between winning and losing.
Absolutely. But there's so much more to unpack.
There is. In the next part, we're going to dive deeper into the importance of consumer understanding, that strategy logic flow we touched on, and the process of reverse engineering strategic options.
This is a fascinating concept.
It is.
So before we move on, I want to ask our listeners, as you think about your own goals and aspirations, which of these 5 choices do you think is the most crucial for your success? Let us know in the comments. We always love hearing from you.
We do. It's great to get your perspectives.
All right, we'll be right back with part 2, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into playing to win. In part 1, we really dug into those 5 key choices of strategy. Those big decisions that set you up for success. Now let's talk about putting those choices into action.
And one of the things that really stood out to me in this book was how much they emphasize really truly understanding your consumers. It's not just about knowing their demographics. It's about getting inside their heads.
Exactly. They argue that you can't really win if you don't truly grasp what your consumers need and want. Even those needs, they might not even be able to articulate themselves.
It's about going beyond the surface.
Oh, it is.
They tell this great story about Gillette developing the guard razor for the Indian market. And it just perfectly illustrates this whole point.
It really does.
So what's so fascinating about this example?
Well, Gillette didn't just rely on market data or assumptions about Indian consumers. They sent a team to India to actually watch men shaving in their homes.
I bet that was eye-opening. What did they learn?
Well, they had this real aha moment when they realized that a lot of Indian men didn't have access to running hot water.
Which, is something that most razor companies just take for granted.
Right, like it's a given. But in India, it wasn't.
So it was a simple insight, but a really crucial one.
Yeah.
And it completely changed the design of the razor.
Oh, yeah. They ended up creating this guard razor with a single blade and this easy rinse cartridge that worked perfectly even with cold water. It was a game changer.
It sounds like it. So what was the impact?
Well, the guard razor became the best-selling razor in India within just 3 months.
That's incredible. So it just goes to show that empathy and really understanding your customers, that can be a powerful competitive advantage.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes you wonder how many opportunities are missed because companies aren't truly connecting with their customers on that deeper level.
Yeah.
So how can businesses make sure they're really getting to know their consumers? Because it seems like it goes, way beyond just sending out surveys.
It does. It's about actively engaging with your customers, observing their behavior, in their natural environment, truly listening to their stories and their feedback.
So it's about really understanding the context in which they're using your products and your services, and maybe uncovering those needs that they're not even aware of yet.
Yeah. It's kind of like being a detective. You're looking for those clues. You're piecing together this puzzle.
That's a good analogy. So how do you move from that deep understanding of consumers to actually crafting a winning strategy? I know Lafley and Martin introduced this framework called the strategy logic flow.
Right. And it starts with a really thorough industry analysis.
Okay, so before you even start thinking about your own business, you need to understand the bigger picture of the industry you're operating in.
You got it. What are the key trends? Who are the major players? Where are the opportunities? You have to really get a handle on all of that.
It's about knowing the lay of the land.
It is. And once you have a good grasp of those industry dynamics, well, then you move on to customer value analysis.
And I imagine this is more than just, asking your customers, hey, what do you like? What do you dislike?
Oh, absolutely. It's about really understanding that whole customer experience, from the moment they become aware of your product all the way through to the point of purchase and even beyond.
So you're looking at that entire customer journey. What are you trying to identify?
Well, you're looking for those pain points, you're looking for their unmet needs, you're really trying to understand the costs and the benefits they associate with your product or service.
So it's about finding those areas where you can create the most value for your customers.
Right. And remember, it's not just about understanding their needs. It's also about understanding the costs they incur when buying and using your products.
Right, because sometimes those costs can be hidden.
They can. And a winning strategy, it takes all of this into account. It creates value for everyone involved, consumers, customers, and the company itself.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where everyone benefits.
Yeah. And once you really understand the industry and your customers, well, then the next step is relative position analysis.
Okay, so now it's time for a little bit of self-reflection.
It is. You need to objectively assess your strengths and weaknesses compared to your competitors. What do you do better than anyone else, and where you fall short?
It's about knowing where you stand.
It is. You need to know what cards you're holding before you can actually play the game effectively. If you overestimate your strengths or underestimate your weaknesses, well, you're setting yourself up for trouble.
It's like going into a big game without having scouted out your opponent.
That's a good way to put it. And then the final piece of this strategy logic flow is competitive reaction analysis.
Okay, so what is that all about?
Well, this involves really thinking about how your rivals might respond to your strategic moves.
So you're not just planning your own moves, you're trying to anticipate your competitors' moves as well.
Exactly. It's about thinking like your competitors, trying to get inside their heads and predict how they'll react to what you do.
It sounds like a game of chess where you're always thinking a few moves ahead.
That's a good analogy. And all of this leads to the next big idea in the book: reverse engineering strategic options.
Okay, that sounds intriguing. Can you break down what that actually means?
Well, it's a process designed to really test your strategic choices to make sure that you're not just going with your gut feeling.
So it's about bringing a more analytical, data-driven approach to decision-making.
You got it. It takes some of the emotion and the guesswork out of it and helps you make those critical decisions based on, evidence and logic.
So how does this reverse engineering process work in practice?
Well, they break it down into 5 steps. First, you got to generate a wide range of possibilities. Explore those different where to play and how to win options.
So it's about not limiting yourself to just one or two paths.
Exactly. Cast a wide net. Then you reverse engineer the logic of each option. So you ask yourself, what conditions have to be true for this option to really succeed?
So you're kind of working backward from that desired outcome.
Yeah, exactly. And then you move on to step 3. Identify those barriers to choice. So those conditions that seem least likely to be true, the things that could derail your strategy.
So you're looking for those potential weak points.
You are. And once you've identified those barriers, well, then you design and conduct some tests to either validate or invalidate those critical conditions.
So it's about gathering evidence, right?
Yes. To support or refute those assumptions you've made.
Okay, so you're not just making assumptions, you're actually testing them. And then finally, what?
Well, then, based on the results of your tests, you make the choice. You commit to the option that has passed the most rigorous scrutiny, the one that has the strongest evidence to back it up.
So it's all about letting that evidence guide you.
It is. And that's what makes this whole reverse engineering process so powerful. It helps you mitigate risks, make more informed decisions, and ultimately, increase your chances of success.
It sounds like a really valuable tool.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine it can also be a pretty intense process. And I know Lafley and Martin, they also talk about the importance of having an outside strategy partner to help with this, right?
They do. They argue that having that external advisor, well, it can help CEOs maintain that outward focus and challenge those internal assumptions that we all sometimes get stuck in.
So it's about having someone who can provide that objective perspective.
Yes, someone who's not afraid to ask those tough questions. And Lafley himself, he had this very close partnership with Roger Martin, his co-author.
Yeah, Martin played a key role in P&G's strategic transformation, didn't he?
He did.
It's a great example of how having that trusted advisor, someone who can really push you, can be so valuable.
Absolutely. So before we move on, I'm curious, what has resonated most with you about this whole reverse engineering approach?
I think for me, it's that emphasis on really testing those assumptions and involving, skeptics in the process. It's so easy to get caught up in your own ideas and your own way of thinking. And having someone who can push back and challenge you, well, it can be incredibly valuable. It seems like a really powerful way to make more informed decisions and to actually mitigate risks.
That's a great point. I really appreciate how systematic the process is. It provides this clear roadmap for navigating those complex choices, and it makes sure that everyone's aligned on those key conditions for success. It takes the guesswork out of strategy and replaces it with a more, rigorous evidence-based approach.
I love that. It's not about avoiding those tough questions or suppressing dissent. It's about embracing those challenges and using them to make your strategy stronger. Well, in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to explore what it actually looks like when a strategy is truly working. We'll delve into those 6 telltale signs of a winning strategy, so stay tuned. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into playing to win. We've covered a lot of ground, from those 5 key choices to the whole reverse engineering process, and how important it is to truly understand your customers.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. But before we wrap up, we need to talk about what it actually looks like when a strategy is really working.
How do you know you're on the right track?
Exactly. And Lafley and Martin, they lay out 6 telltale signs. So let's dive in. What's the first one?
The first sign is having a unique activity system. You're doing things differently than your competitors. And I don't just mean incrementally better, but fundamentally different.
So not just tweaking the recipe a bit, but having a whole different approach to baking the cake.
Yeah, exactly. You're creating a distinct way of delivering value, something that sets you apart and makes it really hard for others to just copy.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second sign?
The second sign is that you have a clear target audience. You've got customers who absolutely love what you do, but you've also got those non-customers who just aren't your focus.
So it's okay if some people don't get it.
It is. You can't please everyone. And if you try to, you'll just end up diluting your message and your impact.
It's about focusing your energy on those core customers, right? The ones who truly resonate with your brand and what you're offering.
You got it. And the third sign might seem a little counterintuitive, but your competitors are profitable.
Really? How is that a good thing?
Well, it means you've created a healthy ecosystem, one where multiple players can thrive. You're not in the zero-sum game where only one company can win.
So you're not trying to crush the competition. You're creating an environment where everyone can succeed.
Precisely. And that brings us to the fourth sign. You have more resources to invest than your competitors.
Because you're winning the value equation, you're generating more profits, and that gives you the firepower to, innovate, expand, and just really solidify your position.
Exactly. And then the fifth sign is that your competitors, they're attacking each other, not you.
That sounds like a pretty good place to be.
It is. It means you're the clear leader, the one to beat. And your competitors, they're too busy fighting amongst themselves to really focus on taking you down.
They're not even on your radar.
Right. And finally, the sixth sign is that you keep winning consistently. Your advantage, it's sustainable. You're able to adapt to those changing conditions and maintain that leadership position.
It's not just a fluke or a one-hit wonder. It's a pattern of success that shows how strong and resilient your strategy is.
Exactly. So these 6 signs, they really paint a clear picture of what it looks like to have a truly winning strategy, one that creates real value for your customers, outmaneuvers the competition, and delivers those consistent, sustainable results.
It's really inspiring to see how these principles can play out in the real world. It's not about luck or just following the latest trends. It's about making those smart choices, building the right capabilities, and staying laser focused on your goals. And what really stuck with me from this whole deep dive is how important it is to be adaptable.
Adaptability is key in today's world.
It is. because things change so quickly. So it's not about finding that perfect strategy. It's about creating a strategy that can evolve as the market changes.
You need to be able to pivot and adjust your course as needed.
And I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners. It's not just about setting a strategy and forgetting it. It's about constantly evaluating and evolving it to make sure it's still serving you well.
Absolutely. And if you want to delve deeper into these ideas, be sure to check out Playing to Win.
It's a fantastic book filled with great insights and practical advice. So that's it for our deep dive into strategy. I hope you found it valuable.
I did. Always great to have these conversations.
And until next time, keep diving deep.